Welcome to the LSI Behind the Wind podcast. I'm Sean Slatter. For 30 years, I've dedicated my life to the science of business development. I've seen the impact of our work, which has evolved into economic development and now social impact. This is episode 6, and I'm so excited to have the opportunity to be with Chris Wegner this morning and talk about his career. Chris is a DoD executive that has spent his life, the last 30 years of his career, as a acquisition executive, and he has such a broad background in all types of acquisition and contracting, and has a real wealth of experience and depth that I think you're going to find interesting as we go through this morning. So Chris, thank you for being with me. And as we start, could you just talk about yourself, and we'll explore some of these various assignments that you've had. But talk about yourself and your background, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about your career.
Yeah, Sean, first of all, just thanks for inviting me onto the podcast. I'm very excited to be here today and to talk about my career in the Air Force and how I hope that translates into success for LSI and for our clients in the future going forward. So, humble beginnings, growing up in Texas, went through the Reserve Officer Training Corps program under scholarship at the University of Texas in Austin. So I'm a proud Longhorn grad. For any of you Sooners out there listening, I'm sorry for you. So I went through the ROTC program there and graduated with an aeronautical engineering degree and got my commission in the Air Force. The Air Force, in its infinite wisdom, decided they didn't need an engineer at that time when I was graduating, so they were going to turn me into a contracting officer. So I started out doing operational contracting at Hurlburt Field in Florida, and then my career just took off from then. So the great thing about Air Force is they provide great training and education opportunities. And so I never felt like I didn't have the opportunity to grow and succeed as a contracting officer. And then my career spanned into, program management opportunities, squadron commander as a natural development for an officer. And then I had the real pleasure of being a senior contracting official in 3 different disciplines. The first one was out in the space business in Los Angeles, California, which is just a really cool mission and a job I really loved. And then I got an opportunity to go out to Europe and be a senior contracting official for United States Air Forces in Europe and Air Forces Africa. Completely different mission set, which I'm sure we'll get into, than the space business. And then I came back here to Utah, which is where we're going to call home, and worked in the Air Force Sustainment Center in that senior contracting official role as well.
Chris, so did you always have this idea you wanted to serve, and why the Air Force? Talk about your thoughts and path just into the military, and then specifically into the Air Force.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, coming out of high school, I didn't have the internal funding to guide my own education, and so the Air Force offered me the scholarship. So that was kind of my connection to the Air Force. My connection to aeronautical engineering was we had a good family friend who was one of the original designers in the Skunk Works program for Lockheed Martin, original designer, aeronautical engineer on the SR-71 program back in the 60s. And so he sparked my interest in engineering. And then, my path to the Air Force was really more economical than anything. Once I was on active duty, those sirens are not coming for me if you can hear those in the background. So, once I was on active duty, my attitude was always, as long as I'm enjoying myself, I'm continuing to travel and see new places, and I'm progressing in my career, I was going to continue on with it. I only had a 4-year commitment coming out of college, and I was never really career-minded for the Air Force, but I just kept enjoying it, and I kept getting great assignments. I can't think of a bad assignment that I had in the Air Force. And so I just continued with it. I did try to retire a couple times, and the Air Force has this way of dangling a carrot out in front of you. And so I just kept going until it felt right that it was time to make the transition.
So, this isn't unusual for a lot of people, that you have this idea, this is what I want to do, or that your career just sort of pulls you along. And that happened with me as well. Talk about your foundation of engineering and how that allowed you to be a better contracting executive.
Yeah, well, I was really fortunate, I think, to have that technical background and then have that blended with the education experience that I got in the Air Force. I think it allowed me to look at things from a different optics when I was involved in business decisions and interfaces with contractors, because I did understand, kind of how airplanes fly and how space systems work. And I understood, kind of the technical side of the business. So I never felt like I was going to go into negotiations or a setting that I didn't at least have some type of technical foundation. And then also, like I mentioned before, the Air Force does a great job of training us in our business discipline of acquisitions. And so I thought it was a great marriage in the end of having that discipline. And it was kind of a unique situation. I didn't really run across a whole lot of others in my career who had that kind of blend. And so I thought it helped me not only in the technical aspects of my career, but it also helped me, be a more well-rounded officer and understand other aspects of the mission.
Absolutely. You had the opportunity to be deployed several times, and I'm sure that made a significant impression and impact on your career and your thinking. Talk about that for a minute and your thoughts on these deployments to these various areas.
Sure. So I was deployed in 2003 as the chief of contracting at Bagram Air Base. And just, for all of my deployment activity, it was really motivating just to do the job in that setting. It was really a wonderful time, actually, to be deployed. Being away from family was really the biggest hardship and the only thing that kind of made it not ideal. But the connection to your mission partners and the sense of mission. I mean, it was just mission, mission, mission every day. And so you always felt like, sometimes in contracting, it takes a long time to see the end product. When you're deployed, that's not the case. There's immediate gratification and sense of, I did something to help the mission succeed. There was also those relationships that I was able to build with, particularly the Army, in my case, and the other sister services. And so I learned a lot about cross-teaming. I learned a lot about fostering relationships and how important that is to the job of getting contracting done. It's not just sitting at your desk and pushing paper. It's really about building those relationships and understanding the mission needs of our partners. Just some specific thoughts, at Bagram, just as an example, the main street through Bagram was called Disney Avenue. I think it was called that because it was the most magical place on base. And when I was there in 2003, it was the only roadway that I can remember that was paved. And so we had a paving project. And, if you can imagine, here in Utah, the construction going along I-15 and the high tech that's going on there, that was not the case in Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. If you can imagine, a tractor from the early 1900s pulling this little cart full of hot asphalt and workers using hand tools literally to pave a couple miles of asphalt. That was that was the construction type of situation that we encountered when we were contracting with local Afghan companies, which we really tried to do a lot of. I had another deployment to Ali Base in Iraq in 2009. And again, another wonderful opportunity working primarily with the Army. But at that time, we were doing a lot of work with USAID as well on economic development of Iraq, doing things like schools and hospitals and roadways and water wells and projects like that were really trying to build up the economy and the infrastructure and the well-being really of the Iraq citizens. Kind of my biggest recollection from there from a business standpoint was we were building water plants, bottling water in Afghanistan or in Iraq. And so, you maybe think of Iraq as not a developed nation in some regards, especially in the middle of war. We were building bottling water plants on several installations. And so you think of that and you think, oh, it's cool. We got bottled water right here. But when you take a step back and think of the logistics implications, so how are we getting bottled water? If there's one thing the Army consumes a lot of out in the desert, it's bottled water. And so how are we getting that before before we built these bottling water plants. Well, we were flying it in on airlift. And so if you can think of the logistics implications of all of that airlift to bring in pallets of water and how that could be repurposed for better uses, once we were able to have bottled water plants in theater that we could then just truck out to the forward operating locations. So really great experiences. Moments were great. Fortunately, I came home unscathed for both of those. But just that tie to the mission every day was really what kept you going through the long hours.
Well, I appreciate your service and your time being deployed and your sacrifice. It's something, as you know, our company is focused on every day and very cognizant about. And appreciate your service, Chris. When I said to our team, when we were looking at this, and I said to our team that I really wanted to do this interview with you as one of our early interviews, they all said, "Whoa." I mean, Chris is now just a few days out of the Air Force and doesn't really know the business, doesn't really understand our company, and still trying to learn a lot about what we're doing. I said, that's exactly why I wanted to do this with you early. And why I was so excited to have this conversation with you is that you have, as I said opening this up, you've had such a unique career as an acquisition and contracting executive. You've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different contractors, thousands of contractors, different agencies, different organizations. And I've got a lot of questions that I know our clients and the industry is interested, and they typically do not have an opportunity to have this kind of candid conversation with an acquisition executive. And I know that this is your point of view. It's not the Department of Defense. It's not the federal acquisition regulations. And as we go through this, I really want you to talk about your opinion and your assessment of some of these various issues that we're gonna go through. And like I said, most people in our industry, even some of the very best business development executives, never have the opportunity to interface with a contracting executive at your level and get an assessment and guidance on how they can be better and what is it that their customers are looking for. So not only have you done this yourself, not only have you been a practitioner on the other side, but then you've also really done a lot to set as a leader in these various organizations to work with your subordinates on these kinds of issues. So I also love that, you talked about working base operations in a deployed situation, and also you've had the opportunity to have responsibility for complex space systems, these very challenging space acquisitions. So as we go through this, as you may know, we have about 400 active clients, and we have Fortune 500 companies, some of the top government contractors, Fortune top 10 in the Fortune 500 list, down to small businesses and startups. And there's a lot of similarities, whether you're a contractor providing base operations or a Boeing providing a space system. So sort of keep that in mind as we go through this. You talked briefly about this path that you had into contracting, and then most of your career became contracting. We think about an Air Force officer doing battle, but talk about your own battle in contracting, and you talked about these deployments, but working as part of this warfighting team to the benefit of national security.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. You started off with thanking me for my service, but it really is my pleasure. I wouldn't have continued with it if it wasn't my desire to serve our nation and continue on. So it really was my pleasure all along. So, the thing about the Air Force and about the way we're structured a little different than some of the other services is I was able to build that technical and business acumen from the very beginning. The other services, they go out and the Army and the Marine Corps specifically, they build an operational discipline first. And so then they transition into more support type career fields later on in their careers, kind of at the senior company grade officer, kind of the 8 to 10 to 12 year point. And so in the Air Force, a different model where we have these disciplines where you can build expertise in a support role from the very beginning, I think was very beneficial to me. The downside of that is maybe you don't have as much of a connection to the warfighting mission as some of our sister services do. And so you have to work a little bit harder, I think, as an Air Force support officer to tie into that mission and to really understand the warfighter focus. But in terms of building that depth and acquisition knowledge and capability, I think the Air Force is very good in that regard. I did have a lot of memorable experiences, as you mentioned, in working with a lot of different companies, all the way from asphalt roads in Afghanistan to space vehicles like the GPS constellation. One of my most memorable experiences on the system side was with the GPS program. We had a requirement to reopen negotiations on space vehicles 9 and 10. And I had a young company grade officer working for me at the time. He was a contracting officer, and he was so diligent and dug in so deep with our partnering agencies, whether it was DCAA, DCMA, other experts. He knew that contractor's proposal better than they did. So when he went into negotiations, he was so prepared to win that battle, because that's kind of how you look at it in some regards, that we were, almost guaranteed success and to get a good deal out of that. But it was because of his business acumen and diligent efforts to understand the real outcome and the government's objectives that he was able to be successful in that. And so, my own personal experience and perspective is that we're in the business to partner with industry. In most regards, we both have the mission in mind. There's obviously a profit motivation in the private sector, but when we're both aligned to satisfying the mission and we really partner, that's when we have the best opportunities for success and a great outcome.
I'll tell you an interesting story. We were working the GPS program for about 20 years at SMC and with a large client. And we worked a large capture and proposal engagement for this client. They won after a lot of time had passed. It was a long acquisition cycle that the proposal took about 2 years for us to prepare. It was a huge proposal. We're going to talk about proposals in a minute. One of the things that really shaped our business that you might find interesting was the proposal went in after 2 years of working this proposal, and we had a team of 50 people working it between the client and the LSI team. When the proposal went in, then there was this long period in which the government was reviewing these documents. And the client had a low expectation that they were going to win this opportunity, win this contract. When the government finally awarded this contract, so much time had passed that they couldn't remember what they had put in the proposal. The client had called us and said, "We're in a panic. We need you to come back in and explain to us, what did we promise our customer in this proposal?" Because they had relied on us so heavily in building this proposal, and so much time had passed that we came in and helped recreate this and started building this transition from from the proposal to contract award. That evolution became our program execution practice area, but it came from that opportunity. It was a GPS opportunity at SMC. So it's interesting that you'd mentioned that. So, I mean, talking about proposals, we're going to talk about capture in these later episodes, but I hear this all the time. What is the customer thinking? And there's all kinds of methodologies for building effective proposals, and we'll talk some more about that. But tell me, as a practitioner, you've reviewed hundreds or thousands of proposals in your career. What is your approach? How do you review a contractor proposal, or how did you advise your subordinates in reviewing proposals? And I'm not talking about, okay, this is the FAR and this is our rubric for reviewing these proposals. I'd like to know, throughout your career, did you have a methodology? What were things that you were looking for in proposals that really impressed you and that influenced your decision making?
Yeah, well, Sean, your experience with the global positioning system is not unique in terms of it taking a couple of years to get to the final solution. So unfortunately, that's part of the process, and we need to get better at that. I guess the advice I would give is that volume does not necessarily equate to success. I would say keep it as simple as possible, but you have to make sure that you're answering the question, especially during discussions. I would try. My own personal perspective was to just be as open and candid and honest with our communications with industry as we could, because really the end result of a competitive acquisition is to try and garner the best offering from each contractor as the end result, because we want good, honest competition, and we want the best proposal to win, and we want each offer to have an opportunity to provide their best proposal. So those open and candid discussions were really important from my perspective. You talked about the length of time that it takes. My advice would be, as much as you can, try to maintain the continuity of proposal team members throughout the entire process. I've seen examples where we start to interface with different individuals, and I think the offers lose some opportunity to maintain a consistent answer and a consistent proposal effort when they have team members fluctuate. I completely understand that it's challenging to do that over the course of a couple of years, but especially in a really complex situation with complex technical requirements, when you have team members rotate in and out, you really lose some consistency, and you have an opportunity for there to be mistakes in the proposal in that process. And if I could just, every opportunity you get, ask the government for clarification instead of making assumptions. I mean, anytime you get a chance to talk to government officials, you really want to hone in on making sure you understand what they're asking for, because it's really important that you actually answer the question that's being asked, and don't stumble over an issue and go from green to red, or yellow to red because you addressed the question in the wrong way.
I really appreciate you emphasizing that. What most acquisition executives don't realize is, on the other side, you've got your team building the RFP and a process and putting it out there. The contractor then has this army that is trying to interpret every single change and movement, and it's a chess game. And I love that you said, hey, it's a dance between the customer and and industry to get to the best possible solution. It really is this back and forth, with the end result being and objective being the same. It should be the same. You said ask for clarity. I can tell you that our team, and I've personally sat in a lot of these meetings from the CEO down, saying, if we ask this question, we have a gap of understanding. We really need clarity. But if we ask that question, what will our competitors do with that information? Or do we really want this is the kind of dialogue that's going on the other side. Do we really want our customer to answer that question and then release that to our competitors? Maybe we've got a better assumption. Maybe we've got some kind of secret insight to this requirement. That kind of stuff goes on all the time, and it makes for this interesting approach to proposal development. I don't know if you have any comments about that, but and you'll see
Yeah,
this
sure.
now that you're on the other side in real time.
Sure, I do, Sean. When we're in the pre-RFP stage, and the government is doing market research and industry days and leading up to RFP release, your comments are completely valid, and I've seen that over and over again, where companies try to hold their cards close to the vest, and not want to release their trade secrets or their approach. And I think that's a valid concern. Again, I would, in those instances, I would communicate clearly with the government team that, hey, we have this question, we need this clarification. And if we give you our answer, we're expecting that to not end up then as advice in the solicitation for everyone else to witness. So there's an art to helping the government kind of shape the requirements, shape the evaluation criteria, without divulging your approach and things that are going to help you garner the win. So I completely get that. I would say once the RFP is out and certainly once the proposals have been delivered, I don't think that's as much of a concern. I think you need to ask the questions that you need to get clarity, to make your proposal better. The government teams in some regard are separated by technical discipline and in some instances by offer. So I would not be as concerned about a question you're asking or an approach that you're taking bleeding over into another offer's proposal once the proposals have been delivered and we're in the evaluation phase. It's just I haven't seen that happen. The government takes a lot of effort to make sure that it's fair and balanced, and that we're evaluating each offer against the evaluation criteria, not against each other. That's the SSA's job in the end, is to do the best value trade-off. It's not the evaluation team's job to get into comparisons between offers.
I appreciate that. Chris, our paths have paralleled. Our career has really been in parallel for the last 30 years. And you and I have both seen such a evolution of how the U.S. government acquires commodities and services. I think when you and I both started our career, it was an interesting time because the science of acquisition on the government side had become a focus of the federal government, and industry was responding. And although LSI had been working in this field for 20 years prior to me joining the company, you remember when you first started in contracting, how it was becoming this science. And I think we saw this pendulum swing to one side, where about maybe 15 years ago, it was insane. We worked and submitted a 10,000 page proposal for a client. 10,000 pages, we did every bit of it. We did the strategy, the writing, the assembly. We delivered it to the customer on a pallet. So you remember those days. And then the pendulum swung back the other way to, what we need is just a statement of objectives and have the contractor respond in 30 pages. Recently, our team submitted one of the largest proposals in dollar value in the history of our company. The entire proposal, the very technical, very complex proposal, the entire proposal was 100 pages. That included the technical volume, a management volume, a transition volume in 100 pages. How have you seen, and what's your opinion on contracting and proposal development in general? Ultimately, the customer has to have a proposed solution, usually in the form of a proposal, written proposal. How have you seen that change, and what do you see is next? What is the evolution of this?
Yeah, so a great point. So the first thing I would say is maybe we realized if we get proposals that are 10,000 pages, we have to read all that stuff, right? And so there's a challenge on the other end. I've recently seen $50 million acquisitions that were done with oral proposals.
Yep.
I mean, so you think about things like that and how much the pendulum has swung, and they were very successful efforts. And of course, we're seeing a lot of evolution of things like pitch days and commercial solution openings and other transactions. And those are very abbreviated approaches to acquisitions, but very effective when they have their place. And so absolutely the pendulum has swung. I would go back to what I said earlier, though, keep it as simple as possible. We have specifically within the Air Force, we had a mandate that we have to go faster in order to achieve acquisition success and stay on par with our near peer competitors, our adversaries. One of the mantras of the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Jerome Brown, is accelerate, change, or lose. And so that has a lot of context, both on the operational side, but also on the business side and the acquisition side. We also have right now the new Secretary of the Air Force is Frank Kendall. So if you look at his background and kind of where he grew up, I won't equate myself to Frank Kendall, but a technical background and an engineer who evolved into the business sector. And so when he was, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Technology, you probably remember better buying power and those tenets of improving acquisitions. And he even authored, a paper for DAU called Getting Defense Acquisition Right. And so now we've got this executive as the Secretary of the Air Force, who clearly understands the business environment on both sides, on the private sector side and on the federal government side. And so I think that's naturally going to translate into hopefully effective acquisition policy, at least on the Air Force side. And then I think the Air Force, personally, I think the Air Force has kind of been a trendsetter in acquisitions in recent years. And so that'll bleed over into the other defense entities as well.
We hear that a lot, that the Air Force is the benchmark, and a lot of other DoD and FedCiv organizations will come to the Air Force and learn or still borrow case studies and tools and templates that they can use in these other agencies. And I think while we've had a historic and a legacy with a strong Air Force pedigree, I think it's good. I think there was a lot of best practices that came out of the Air Force and that our team brought to the organization that has really been beneficial as we have embedded LSI inside of the other DoD installations, agencies, and a lot of the FedCiv offices as well. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that thought, so the bottom line is, we have to go faster in defense acquisitions. I think the environment is ripe for that, but we've lost the edge in some regards, and so we don't have the time to review 10,000 page proposals. We've got to figure out a way to get it done right and get it done fast.
So with that, in going back to that 10,000 page proposal that I had mentioned, the client paid us $12 million to build that proposal. We just submitted and it was huge, and we won, and it was an incredible work. As I said, our team just submitted a very large proposal that was a very large dollar proposal that was 100 pages. How would you give an executive or a team advice on being a differentiator with a limited amount of real estate in this proposal. I mean, 30 pages for a technical proposal is a challenge. And what is it that these companies can do to really differentiate themselves?
Yeah, well, the challenge is that source selection authorities differ in their risk tolerance when they're in these trade-off scenarios, and some of that is just a personal perspective, or their background and what they're looking for in terms of a mission partner. But the evaluation decisions, regardless of who the SSA is, must always be centered on the evaluation criteria. And so I think you have to ask yourself when you're building that proposal, are you really addressing the evaluation criteria that's laid out in the RFP?
That's right.
The extraneous stuff may help, turn a meets into an exceeds and a strength in some areas, and so that's not trivial. It's important to get those strengths in a proposal. But if you don't answer the evaluation criteria, you're exposing a weakness or a deficiency, and so you gotta really, I think, start as the basis of, okay, let's make sure we're satisfying and meeting the evaluation criteria to the best of our company's ability, and then build off of that. And if you need to expand, then use that as the foundation, and then build a better proposal and a better offering for the government in that regard. And on the government side, the end result of an evaluation is a myriad of documents. Just like you said, there's so much effort put into the proposal. When the evaluation team is done, I mean, you think about the comparative analysis report and the source selection decision document and the clearance briefings and the decision briefings and the debriefs that you have to prepare. And those all have to be consistent. And so if you've got, too many evaluation criteria and really large proposals, and you're trying to maintain consistency across all those documents, that's where you see a lot of the time come in, is just, making sure that everything is consistent across the board, and a really detailed cross-reference matrix for all those documents. So I think it's a give and take both on the industry side and the government side. In the government, developing technical criteria that really hone in on what's important to the mission, and then the offers really providing proposals that show their capability to satisfy those desires in the most succinct way possible.
I appreciate that. One of the things that our clients often ask us is we spend so much time and effort. There's such a huge investment that goes into these proposals. And now what's really shifted, I think, in the last few years, as you said, that the government is working to become faster, that the turnaround time from the identification of the requirement until the contract award has to be quicker, and there's a mandate for that. So a lot of the investment has gone into what the industry and what our company coined as capture, which is ensuring that the team really understands, has a relationship with the customer, and because of that relationship really understands what the requirement is and can build a solution that then can be conveyed in a really succinct and illustrative manner in the form of a proposal. Most of the funding now goes into that capture phase of this business development lifecycle versus the proposal phase, where it used to be the opposite. It used to be that we do a little bit of capture work, and then don't worry, this is all gonna come out in the proposal phase. And even now, I joke about, every $1 billion opportunity is now a 30-page proposal. It's not. I mean, we have recently also turned in and prepared a 3,000 page proposal for one of our clients as well. So we're seeing both. We see these really small proposals, 20, 30 pages, and also a large 3,000, 4,000 page proposal. But my question to you is, does the government recognize, appreciate, and value that investment that companies make in in this product. It's significant. It is huge.
If I was being candid with you, I would say that not all acquisition practitioners or executives really understand bid and proposal and the amount of capital investment, both in time and money and human resources that go into that effort. We have programs, in the DoD and in the Air Force specifically, where we do education with industry and things of that nature, where we try to, send officers out and get an education in the industry's perspective, and then bring that back into their careers in the Air Force. So things like that help, but those are really limited and isolated opportunities. And so, that B&P effort, I think I think it's a bit of a mystery to a lot of government practitioners. How do you fix that? I'm not sure. I mean, when you're doing the capture business and you're in front of one of the government executives, maybe the key requirements owner, and maybe talk about that. Maybe instead of the glossy cover, display that you bring in from that talks about technical capabilities, talk about, here's what acquisition timelines do to the private sector. Here's what, voluminous evaluation criteria do to the private sector in terms of time and in terms of capital that industry has to invest to win these opportunities. So maybe that's a little bit of an opportunity to focus on, hey, let me help you understand an industry partner's perspective and not just talk about your technical capability and how you're going to help them achieve their requirement.
I mentioned that this client paid us $12 million to build this proposal. I mean, that sounds like a lot. I can tell you, we saw what the capture, all of the strategy, the B&P for this program was in the end. And this was a fraction of what this company spent to win this contract. I've often wondered if the customer knew or saw those costs and it translated into, well, at some point, the company, our client, has to recoup that investment through pricing and whatever. I mean, is it worth it in the end? I don't know. One of the things that I've always advised our clients, and I've given a lot of talks and advice to clients, our team, and proposal executives that I've known, has been, I've wanted to see artwork on every page. My history and experience is that if you can get the SSA, the team, reviewing a document somewhat like a magazine, where they can easily go through and pull from this artwork graphs and illustrations and whatnot that becomes memorable, that when they come down to quantifying each section of the proposal, that's going to help in print and make it memorable, make the message memorable. You've reviewed hundreds of proposals, thousands of proposals. I'd like your thoughts on whether you think my theory is correct or not.
Well, you're putting me in a tough situation, Sean, since you are my boss.
No, I want you to tell me, like I said, you're a few days out. I didn't want to have this kind of conversation with you, 2 years in.
Yeah. So, the fact of the matter is some people are visual learners. And so having those graphs and those pictures, I think is helpful in some regards. A correct picture, a correct graph can convey a lot of information in and of itself. And so I don't think it's wrong. I mean, obviously, the more pictures you put in the proposal, the longer the page count is going to get. And so that's, just an obvious artifact of that approach. I do not think it's wrong. I guess I would say, what's the audience that you're trying to reach with that effort? Realize that the source selection authority is not going to look at every page of the proposal.
That's right? It. That's exactly right.
Yeah. And so if that graph or that picture that you put in makes it easy to convey a message from the source selection evaluation team to the SSA, there's probably a lot of merit in that approach, because you've done, part of their job for them. You're like, okay, they throw that graph in a briefing chart, and now it conveys the message without someone having to read bullets on a chart. And so, understanding your audience and what the intent of that graph is, or that picture is, I think would be helpful in the process.
I love that you said that, because in 30 years, I've never had a government executive say, no, let's be realistic. We do not read every single page. Anytime this question's been asked, anytime I've asked somebody this question, they've come back with, of course we do. We read every page. It's an intense analysis. But I can tell you, over the years, I've known some of these SSAs, and I know what kind of pressure they're under. I know that they don't have 3 weeks to review the volume of proposals. Let's look at this 100-page proposal that I mentioned earlier. There were 11 proposals that went in, so that's over 1,000 pages of document that this SSA is going to be reviewing. There is no way that that individual, who I know, has the bandwidth to make that happen. So that's what I've always said, is it's got to be memorable. They've got to be able to go through these documents and pull out facts and information that is memorable. That's why the executive summary is so critical. I do think that most of the SSAs will go through the executive summary, which is a critical piece of this document. Any thoughts on that?
You're absolutely right. They will look at the executive summary in detail, and they will, form an opinion in a large degree based on what the evaluation team uncovers during the process. Clearly that's how the process is designed to work, I think. And so, making that impression, if visual arts makes a good first impression, can't hurt. If you're up against a page limitation, though, and often we establish page limitations for the volume, then you got to balance that against making sure you get the message across.
Definitely. And ensuring that you're really conveying in artwork using that real estate of the page that could have been used for text. Does this make sense? I typically find that is valuable, and especially if it's really good artwork. So Chris, I've got a lot of content. We got through about a third of what I wanted to talk with you about today. And so we're going to do some more of these. And I wanted to do this early. As I said, you're just a few days out of the Air Force, and I didn't want you to forget or lose that thinking. I wanted to have this conversation with you. It's really a unique opportunity to have these kinds of candid conversations with an acquisition executive with your background and depth, and just get your opinions and thoughts on some of this. It is so, what you have provided is really some of the thinking and questions that our clients and even our team, even members of our team that some of them have worked for you previously or have worked in your organizations, and they're thinking about this now that they're on the other side. And so I appreciate you being candid. One last question before we wrap this up. Was there anything in your 30-year career, was there any memorable proposals, good or bad, thinking back, that you thought, yes, this is it, or this company or this proposal was just a disaster? Was there any memorable interface that you had with a contractor through a proposal that you can share?
Well, certainly, I think human nature, sometimes the mistakes are the things that that stay in your mind better than some of the successes. And so, I've certainly been part of, or at least got the training out of experiences like sending responses to the wrong offer, and things of that nature. And so never of my own action, but certainly those kind of vignettes become good training material, and they often end up in becoming policies that the government then uses to put extra sets of eyes on everything, which and then of course belabors the process even more. So I've certainly had those kind of memorable experiences in the past. I've had great experiences as well in dealing with offers that really got it and really seemed to understand that this is about the warfighter. In the end, if the government had all the resources and money to do it themselves, they would. They need industry on board because they want the warfighter to succeed. And so you got to keep that in focus, as you're there for a reason, and your reason is mission success. And so the offers and the contractors that I worked with that really got that and understood that, I think left a positive influence on me. And then I would just say, Sean, just from a LSI perspective. So I'm glad the client that paid us $12 million actually won that effort.
Yeah.
If you're going to invest that much effort and money into it, I would say to my fellow LSI brethren out there, let's make sure we're doing everything we can to help our clients succeed, because they're paying us. So looking at it not from us selling products and services to the government, look at it from a perspective of us enabling those clients to have success, and we've got to come through and help them achieve the bottom line. So a little bit different perspective when I look at LSI and look at our role in the process traditionally, not as a direct provider to the government, but as an enabler. Our clients are not going to come back to us if we can't enable their success.
Right.
So I think that's a really important focus for us to have as we're thinking about proposals and thinking about satisfying the government's needs.
I appreciate that. So like I said, I really value this opportunity while it's still fresh in your mind, and that you're now seeing this on the other side, and your perspective of what goes on in these source selection meetings, what goes on with a source selection strategy, and how are decisions made. It really is such a mystery, even to very mature contractors that struggle with it. Not to mention companies that do not interface with the government regularly, or are small businesses, or new to this work. Your perspective is so valuable, and there's a lot that I want to explore with you in some future episodes. So I look forward to that. What do you do when you're not working? You've had this storied career, and I'm interested in how you would leave the office, and then what? What would you do
Yeah,
when you're
you know
not?
what? I'm going to poke at Lauren a little bit because I know she's listening in the background. So she gave me a very clinical introduction as an LSI employee, and basically threw my bio out there on email and on LinkedIn. And I'm really a fun guy in the background. So
A fun acquisition guy. I love this.
yeah. So I mean, I'm a normal guy. I love to go hiking and biking, skiing, play golf. Golf is one of my favorite pastimes and activities. Golf can be an introduction to business, really, in some regards. So, I like to have fun. I like to play with my kids and my dogs. And, there's a lot more behind the scenes than a tie wearing and in the past, uniform wearing acquisition executive. I try to put on a different persona when I leave the office. And, to be honest, though, when I was in the office, that was very important to me to have, the professional persona. And to some people, maybe it came across as, too rigid. Especially on the government side, you had to understand lines of authority and how to execute in that manner. But once the uniform came off, and in my case now, once the tie comes off, I like to have fun and enjoy life just like everyone else.
It's great. Chris, thank you so much. This has been fantastic and a lot of fun, and I really appreciate your insight. So, if you're interested in learning more about this episode or LSI, you can reach us at social at lsiwins.com, SOCIAL at LSIWINS.com. We can give you some more information on some of the topics that were discussed in this episode. And if you need help with capture, proposal, program execution, or other business development needs, our team can connect with you through this social@LSIWins email address. Thanks, Chris. It was really great. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sean.